I have worked in a public library for 8 years, and I'm very concerned with what is going on with libraries currently in the United States. I want this to be more of a discussion video, so I will be asking lots of questions and not necessarily answering all of them. Though I will be showing examples of what is currently happening at various libraries across the country, and I will have everything I talk about linked in the description. I worked at a public library, so I will be focusing on the public library side of things. I'm not very familiar with how school libraries work, so I will not be discussing those. I want to start by saying that libraries are not obsolete. They provide so much more than just books. They are community centers and they can provide amazing services to the community. What they can provide is dependent on funding and the needs of the community. So I will be making another video celebrating libraries and discussing why they're still relevant and all the things that they possibly provide to you. You might not be aware of all of the things that are available at libraries. But today we're going to be talking about the books. I want to start with saying that I am very against the exploitation of children, and I think protecting children is a good thing. However, I believe some of the policies being suggested or put in place in the name of protecting children isn't actually doing that. Another thing I want to start with is that I am in favor of content warnings on books. I think content warnings would be helpful for everyone. I sometimes pick up books as an adult and I was not aware of the content in them and might not have picked them up. Maybe I'm not ready to deal with that content right now. So whether someone is a parent making choices for their children or someone is deciding for themselves what they are ready to read, I think content warnings would be helpful for everyone. Over the past 2 years, there has been a dramatic uptick in book bans and book challenges across the United States. According to the ALA, which is the American Library Association, State of American Libraries report, I will have that linked in the description, 2001 saw a 700% increase in book challenges from the previous year, and book challenges in 2022 nearly doubled that. 48% of those book challenges were taking place in public libraries, which is why I am talking about it. What concerns me even more is 40% of the book challenges were a list of over 100 books being challenged at once. Now, this is speculation, but I have trouble believing a person challenging 100 books at once actually read those books and had problems with them. We know there are groups like Moms for Liberty that put together book lists with the intention of those lists being used to challenge books without anyone having to read them or do their own research on those books. I know if I was reading a book and I had serious problems with it, I probably wouldn't wait to gather a list of 100 books to challenge. I would want to do that one at a time or maybe two at a time, whatever I had checked out at the moment. So why are book challenges a problem? I first want to talk about the difference between a challenge and a ban. A challenge is simply the formal process in which one goes through to challenge whether a book should remain in the library. A ban is when that challenged book is actually removed from the library. So a ban is slightly different from a challenge, and sometimes those terms are used interchangeably, even though they mean different things. The primary reason this is happening is because parents believe certain content in books is inappropriate for their children. I am fine with a parent deciding that a book is not appropriate for their child. I am not fine with a parent deciding that that book is not appropriate for anyone else's children or anyone else in the community. I have primarily seen 3 solutions proposed to keep children from seeing inappropriate content in libraries. Removing books entirely, moving certain books to the adult section of libraries, or having a tiered library card system that allows children to check books out that are deemed appropriate for them. I will be going through each of these. I do not understand having the books removed from the library entirely, though I do understand wanting age-appropriate material for your children. There are several libraries that have faced threats of closure because they wouldn't completely remove certain books. Missouri lawmakers voted to remove all state funding from Missouri public libraries. Residents in the Jamestown Township, Michigan, voted to close the library even after the library moved books with LGBTQIA content behind the desk, and you would have to request those books specifically in order to check them out. And the library in Bonners Ferry, Idaho is facing threats of closure even though it does not have any of the inappropriate books on their shelves, simply because they won't create a collections policy stating that they won't ever purchase certain titles. The The last one is particularly baffling and infuriating for me. The library doesn't even have any of the books that people are wanting banned. So why are there threats to close the library? Even if it did have those books, is it really worth closing the library for that? Moving the books to the adult section or having some sort of tiered library card system that only allows minors to check out age-appropriate books seems like a better solution. Honestly, I agree. Implementing something like this in libraries is difficult, however. Who gets to decide what is age appropriate? What is teen content? What is adult content? I haven't seen agreement anywhere on what makes a book middle grade versus younger YA, or YA versus adult. And someone has to come up with a very clear-cut definition for this to work. Let's say there is a library system where no one under 13 can check out books from the YA or adult sections. Each 13-year-old's a little bit different. One 13-year-old might be ready to handle topics in the YA section, and another 13-year-old might not be ready for that. Who knows a 13-year-old enough to best guide them? Is it their parents or the librarian? Now, I do think the young adult publishing industry has a bit of a problem because a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old are very different. It's a very wide age range to target. On top of that, YA books are sometimes targeted to people in their 20s because publishers know 25-year-olds still read YA and they might have more money than a 13-year-old to spend on books. That is more of a publishing marketing problem, and I'm not going to go too in-depth on that in this video. Before moving on, I am going to go on a really quick tangent. Officially, a librarian is someone who holds a librarian degree. People who work in libraries and have not gone to school to obtain that degree are often called librarian assistants or something to that effect. I was a librarian assistant, not an actual librarian. But in casual speech, it is fine to call anyone that works in the library a librarian, even if they technically aren't. So on to my next point. Is it the responsibility of the people working in the library to know what content is in every single book in the collection? The only way to implement a tiered library card system is to evaluate every single book. I already made a video talking about the library board in Indiana that decided that any book deemed inappropriate for minors must be moved to the adult section. I will have that video linked in the cards as well as in the description. The policy of what is inappropriate is so far-reaching that it moves all children's mysteries to the adult section, even if the topics in those books were talked about in an age-appropriate manner in the books. The library staff are having to read every single book in order to determine its proper place according to the library policy. This puts a tremendous amount of work on the library staff. And what happens when a librarian or staff member messes up and shelves a book incorrectly? Several states have proposed bills that would fine or jail library employees that allow children to have access to inappropriate books. My state had very vague terminology in their bill that would allow library employees to be charged simply by having so-called inappropriate books on the shelf, even in the adult section, because minors could enter the adult section. I hope we can all agree that jailing librarians is not an appropriate consequence. And finally, a tiered library card system places the responsibility fully on library employees. Aren't the parents in a better position to know what content their own child is ready for? As I said earlier, I am in favor of content warnings on books, but I'm not in favor of making librarians responsible for restricting access to those books. Parents can already decide what their child can or cannot read. We don't need our government representatives, library boards, librarians, or other parents deciding what other people can or cannot read. But what about books on library displays? Libraries are not just for children. They are for adults as well. If a display in a prominent place in the library could only display books appropriate to the youngest members of that community, only picture books could be on display in that library. If we agree that we can display more than just picture books, but we also have limits on what can be displayed, we have a lot of the same questions. Who gets to decide what is okay or not? Is it the library employee's responsibility to know what content is in every book on display? What are the consequences of displaying a book that is inappropriate for display? In the library that I worked at, I regularly put books on display that I had not read. Displays usually feature a theme corresponding with a celebration occurring that month. February is Black History Month, March is Women's History Month, May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Month, and June is Pride Month. It is very likely that a library's display will feature books according to those. Some displays might simply be for fun, like all the books have to have a blue cover or all the books have to have a green cover. When people check out books on those displays, I would often find books that fit whatever the theme of the display is and add them to the display even if I had not read those books. And speaking of books I hadn't read, I would recommend books I had not read. Someone might ask for a book or series similar to a recent read, and I would be able to say that people who enjoyed this book also typically enjoyed these other books. Sometimes I hadn't read any of the books in question. Should library staff be required to read every book that they put on display or recommend so that they are aware of the content in those books? I want to reiterate, I am in total support of parents deciding what their children can or cannot read, but I am not in support of anyone deciding what other children can or cannot read. Hopefully this discussion was helpful. Feel free to chat with me in the comments about anything mentioned here. I will be making more videos on libraries, why they are important, how to support them, and current news affecting libraries. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I hope to see you in another video, and happy reading.